Released in 2007 and directed by the legendary Coen Brothers, No Country for Old Men is widely considered one of the greatest crime thrillers ever made. Based on the novel by Cormac McCarthy, the film stars Josh Brolin, Javier Bardem, and Tommy Lee Jones. With its haunting atmosphere, realistic violence, and unforgettable characters, the movie keeps viewers on edge from beginning to end. Before we begin, if you enjoy movie explanations and detailed film breakdowns, make sure to follow the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's dive into one of the most intense thrillers ever created. The story opens in the dry and lonely landscapes of West Texas. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, a veteran lawman, narrates his thoughts about how the world seems to be changing. He talks about how crime has become more violent and unpredictable than ever before. Bell has spent his entire life enforcing the law, but he now feels that he is facing a generation of criminals unlike anything he has seen. His words create an atmosphere of uncertainty and danger before the story even begins. At the same time, a mysterious man named Anton Chigurh is arrested by a police officer. At first he appears calm and silent, but it quickly becomes clear that there is something deeply disturbing about him. While sitting in the police station, Chigurh suddenly attacks the deputy who is guarding him. In a brutal struggle, he kills the officer with shocking determination. The scene is frightening because Chigurh shows no emotion, no anger, and no hesitation. To him, taking a life seems as ordinary as breathing. After escaping, Chigurh steals a vehicle and continues his journey across Texas. Along the way, he encounters another innocent person and kills him without any sign of remorse. The audience quickly realizes that this man is not an ordinary criminal. He follows his own strange philosophy and sees human lives as insignificant. Every action he takes feels cold, calculated, and terrifying. Meanwhile, the story introduces Llewellyn Moss, a skilled hunter and Vietnam War veteran. Moss is living a simple life with his wife, Carla Jean. One day, while hunting in the desert, he notices signs of something unusual in the distance. Curious, he follows the trail and discovers the aftermath of a violent drug deal gone horribly wrong. Scattered across the desert are multiple vehicles and several dead bodies. It is clear that a massive shootout has taken place. Moss carefully investigates the scene, using his survival skills and military experience to understand what happened. The deeper he looks, the more obvious it becomes that millions of dollars were involved in the failed deal. As Moss searches the area, he eventually discovers a pickup truck hidden away from the main crime scene. Inside, he finds another dead man and a large suitcase filled with cash. The amount of money is life-changing. Moss stands there staring at it, fully aware that taking it could alter his future forever. For a moment he hesitates. He understands that money like this belongs to dangerous people. Taking it would place him directly in the path of violent criminals. Yet, the temptation is impossible to ignore. After thinking carefully, Moss decides to take the suitcase and leave the area before anyone arrives. Back at home, Moss tries to act normal, but his discovery remains on his mind. He hides the money and avoids discussing it with anyone. Although he appears calm on the surface, he knows the situation is far from over. Somewhere out there, the people connected to that money will eventually come looking for it. That night, however, Moss cannot stop thinking about one detail from the crime scene. Earlier, he had found a wounded survivor begging for water. At the time, Moss left him behind. But as darkness falls, guilt begins to consume him. He keeps imagining the injured man suffering alone in the desert. Unable to ignore his conscience, Moss decides to return to the scene carrying a container of water. It is a decision made from compassion, but it will ultimately change everything. When he arrives, the area is no longer deserted. Armed men have already reached the location and are searching for clues. Moss realizes immediately that he has made a terrible mistake. The criminals spot evidence of his presence, and before long, he is forced to flee through the darkness. Gunfire erupts around him as vehicles chase him across the desert. Using his intelligence and survival instincts, Moss narrowly escapes. But now his identity is no longer a secret. From that moment forward, the suitcase of money becomes a target. Powerful criminal organizations begin tracking the missing cash. Among those searching is Anton Chigurh, whose ruthless methods make him the most dangerous threat of all. Unlike ordinary criminals, Chigurh never gives up. Once he starts hunting someone, he continues until the job is finished. As dawn approaches, Moss understands the danger surrounding him. The money that once seemed like a blessing has become a curse. Every decision he makes from this point onward could determine whether he survives. Unbeknownst to him, a relentless killer is already following his trail, and the deadly game has only just begun. After escaping the armed men in the desert, Llewellyn Moss returns home knowing that his life has changed forever. The suitcase full of money is now sitting in his possession, but instead of feeling rich, he feels hunted. Every sound outside makes him alert. Every passing vehicle catches his attention. Moss is an experienced survivor, and deep down he understands that the people searching for the money will never simply walk away. Meanwhile, Anton Chigurh continues his relentless pursuit. Unlike most criminals, Chigurh operates according to a strange and terrifying personal code. He believes fate determines everything, and he often leaves people's lives to chance through disturbing coin tosses. His cold and emotionless personality makes him even more frightening because nobody can predict what he will do next. The investigation into the missing money begins to grow. Criminal organizations involved in the failed drug deal become desperate to recover their cash. They hire men to track down whoever took it. At the same time, Sheriff Ed Tom Bell starts examining the violent events unfolding across his county. Bell senses that something unusually dangerous is happening, but even he cannot yet imagine how deadly the situation will become. Knowing that danger is approaching, Moss decides he must protect his wife, Carla Jean. He doesn't tell her every detail, but he understands that staying together could place her at risk. Moss begins making plans to move around and stay one step ahead of whoever is searching for him. His military background helps him think strategically, but he is facing enemies with vast resources and endless determination. Back at the crime scene, investigators uncover new evidence. The discovery confirms that someone escaped with the money. This information spreads quickly among the criminals involved. Every clue points toward Moss, and the search for him becomes increasingly intense. The desert that once seemed vast and empty suddenly feels very small. Anton Chigurh eventually gains access to information that helps him identify Moss as the man who took the suitcase. Using a tracking device hidden inside the money, Chigurh begins narrowing down his target's location. He approaches the task with chilling patience. For him, hunting Moss is not personal. It is simply a mission that must be completed. Moss, however, is not an easy target. He notices suspicious activity around him and starts changing his routines. He avoids predictable behavior and remains constantly aware of his surroundings. His instincts tell him that he is being tracked, even though he doesn't yet know exactly how. As pressure mounts, Moss decides to leave town temporarily. Before departing, he makes arrangements for Carla Jean's safety. Their conversations reveal how much they care about each other. Carla Jean senses that something serious is happening, but Moss refuses to reveal the full truth. He believes protecting her means keeping her away from the dangerous details. While Moss travels, Anton Chigurh leaves a trail of violence behind him. Anyone who stands in his way becomes a potential victim. Businessmen, hired trackers, and ordinary people all discover how ruthless he can be. Chigurh views obstacles as problems to be removed rather than human beings with lives and families. This complete lack of empathy makes him almost seem like a force of nature rather than a normal man. Sheriff Bell continues piecing together the puzzle. Every crime scene he visits leaves him increasingly disturbed. The violence he encounters feels different from anything he experienced earlier in his career. Bell begins questioning whether traditional law enforcement methods are enough to confront a killer like Chigurh. The world around him appears to be changing faster than he can understand. Eventually, Moss reaches a motel where he plans to stay hidden for a while. He carefully chooses his location and remains alert to possible threats. However, he soon discovers evidence that confirms his worst fears. Someone is tracking the money. The realization changes everything. No matter how cautious he is, the suitcase itself is leading his enemies directly to him. Understanding the danger, Moss develops a plan to outsmart his pursuers. He hides the money in a clever location and prepares for the possibility of an attack. Every move he makes becomes part of a deadly chess match between himself and Anton Chigurh. Both men are intelligent, resourceful, and determined to survive. Late one night, the tension finally explodes. Chigurh arrives near Moss's location, guided by the tracking device. The motel becomes the setting for a terrifying confrontation. Moss notices signs that someone is nearby and immediately prepares for combat. He knows that whoever has found him is extremely dangerous. The silence of the night creates unbearable suspense. Both men understand that one mistake could mean death. Moss waits carefully, watching and listening for any movement. Chigurh advances methodically, confident that his target is close. Neither man wants to reveal his position first. What follows is a nerve-wracking encounter filled with fear, strategy, and survival instincts. Moss manages to escape the immediate danger, but the confrontation proves one thing beyond doubt. Anton Chigurh is now directly on his trail. The hunter and the hunted have finally come face to face. As the chapter closes, Moss realizes that running alone may not be enough. Chigurh is unlike anyone he has ever encountered. The money has pulled him into a nightmare from which there may be no escape. And somewhere in the darkness, Anton Chigurh continues moving forward, calm and unstoppable, determined to finish the hunt. The deadly game between Llewellyn Moss and Anton Chigurh is now fully underway. After narrowly escaping the first direct encounter, Moss realizes that survival will require more than luck. Every place he visits could become a trap, and every stranger could be connected to the people searching for the money. The suitcase that once represented freedom and opportunity has become a burden that threatens to destroy everything he loves. After leaving the motel, Moss works quickly to stay ahead of his pursuers. His military training allows him to think strategically under pressure. Instead of panicking, he studies every situation carefully and tries to predict what his enemies will do next. However, he knows that Anton Chigurh is unlike anyone he has faced before. Most people can be reasoned with or distracted, but Chigurh operates according to his own terrifying logic. Meanwhile, Chigurh continues following the signal hidden inside the money. His determination never weakens. He moves from location to location with frightening patience, eliminating anyone who interferes with his mission. To him, violence is not emotional, it is simply a tool used to achieve a goal. This cold attitude makes him one of the most dangerous killers imaginable. At the same time, Sheriff Ed Tom Bell grows increasingly concerned about the case. Every new crime scene reveals more bloodshed and destruction. Bell has spent decades serving the law, yet the brutality surrounding this investigation leaves him troubled. He begins to feel that he is witnessing the arrival of a new kind of criminality, one that cannot be understood through traditional ideas of right and wrong. Bell's conversations with fellow officers reveal his frustration and sadness. He remembers an earlier time when communities seemed safer and criminals appeared more predictable. Now he finds himself chasing men capable of extraordinary cruelty. The sheriff starts questioning whether his experience and wisdom are enough to confront the darkness spreading across his county. While Bell struggles with these thoughts, Moss continues moving from place to place. He understands that remaining in one location for too long would be fatal. Every decision must be calculated carefully. Despite the danger surrounding him, Moss remains determined not to surrender the money. Whether because of pride, survival instinct, or belief in his own abilities, he refuses to give up. Eventually, Moss arrives in another city and checks into a different motel. This time he takes extra precautions. He examines exits, watches nearby activity, and prepares himself for the possibility of another attack. Although exhausted from constant stress, he remains focused. He knows that one careless mistake could end his life. Unfortunately for Moss, others are searching for him besides Chigurh. The criminal organization that lost the money has hired additional operatives to recover it. These men are ruthless and heavily armed. Unlike Chigurh, they are motivated primarily by profit. Still, they are just as determined to locate the missing cash and eliminate anyone standing in their way. As multiple groups begin closing in on Moss, the situation becomes even more dangerous. He is no longer dealing with a single hunter, but several competing forces. Each group wants the money, and none of them care how many people die in the process. The tension continues building as everyone moves closer to the same destination. One night, Moss notices suspicious activity outside his motel room. His instincts immediately tell him that trouble is approaching. Instead of waiting passively, he prepares for action. He carefully monitors the situation and plans his response. The atmosphere becomes incredibly tense as danger creeps closer with every passing minute. Soon, violence erupts. Armed men arrive and chaos fills the motel area. Gunfire breaks out as Moss fights desperately to survive. The confrontation is fast, brutal, and unpredictable. Moss uses every skill he possesses to stay alive, but his enemies are numerous and determined. The once quiet motel transforms into a battlefield. During the firefight, Moss demonstrates remarkable courage and resourcefulness. Even while wounded, he refuses to surrender. Every second becomes a struggle between life and death. The audience witnesses just how far Moss is willing to go in order to escape. His determination is impressive, but the physical and emotional toll is beginning to show. As the battle continues, Anton Chigurh arrives in the area. His appearance adds another layer of danger to an already deadly situation. Unlike the other criminals, Chigurh remains calm and focused amid the chaos. While bullets fly and panic spreads, he moves with chilling confidence. It is as though he has complete faith that fate will guide him to his target. The confrontation leaves several people dead and many others injured. Moss manages to escape once again, but victory comes at a heavy price. He suffers injuries that make continuing his journey increasingly difficult. Blood loss, exhaustion, and constant fear begin wearing him down. Yet, stopping is not an option. If he slows down, his enemies will catch him. After escaping, Moss seeks medical help while trying to remain hidden. Every moment spent recovering increases the risk of discovery. He knows that Chigurh is still searching and that the tracking device inside the money remains a serious problem. No matter how far he runs, the danger follows him. Meanwhile, Sheriff Bell arrives too late to prevent the violence. Standing among the aftermath, he examines the destruction left behind. Once again, he finds himself only a few steps behind the people responsible. The realization frustrates him deeply. Bell wants to stop the bloodshed, but events seem to move faster than he can react. As this stage of the story ends, the stakes are higher than ever. Moss is injured and exhausted. Chigurh remains relentless in his pursuit. The criminal organization is still searching for the money, and Sheriff Bell continues trying to make sense of a situation that grows darker with every passing day. The hunt is no longer just about money. It has become a battle between survival and fate, with every character moving toward a future that none of them can fully control. The next decisions they make will determine who lives, who dies, and whether anyone can escape the consequences of the choices already made. After surviving the violent motel shootout, Llewellyn Moss finds himself in a desperate situation. His injuries are becoming more serious, and every step he takes reminds him that he is running out of time. The money remains in his possession, but keeping it has cost him almost everything. Exhaustion, fear, and constant pressure are beginning to wear him down, yet he refuses to quit. Moss has come too far to turn back now. As he recovers from his wounds, Moss starts thinking more carefully about Carla Jean. The danger surrounding him is no longer limited to himself. Anyone connected to him could become a target. This realization troubles him deeply because protecting his wife has always been one of his main concerns. He understands that as long as he remains connected to the stolen money, Carla Jean may never truly be safe. Meanwhile, Anton Chigurh continues advancing toward his objective with frightening determination. Unlike ordinary criminals, Chigurh never seems affected by fatigue, fear, or doubt. He treats every obstacle as a simple problem to be solved. His strange philosophy convinces him that fate controls everything, and this belief allows him to carry out acts of violence without hesitation or remorse. At the same time, the criminal organization searching for the money becomes increasingly frustrated. Their hired operatives have failed repeatedly, and the trail of bodies left behind continues growing. Every attempt to recover the cash seems to create more chaos. The people responsible for the operation begin realizing that Anton Chigurh may be as dangerous to them as he is to Moss. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell remains determined to stop the violence before more innocent lives are lost. However, each new discovery leaves him feeling older and more disconnected from the world around him. Bell sees evidence of cruelty that he struggles to understand. The case is no longer just another investigation. It has become a reflection of the changing society he fears he can no longer control. During one of his investigations, Bell learns more about Anton Chigurh's past. The stories he hears paint a terrifying picture. Witnesses describe a man who kills without emotion and follows rules that make sense only to himself. Bell begins to understand that Chigurh is unlike any criminal he has encountered before. The realization fills him with unease because traditional law enforcement methods seem powerless against such an individual. While Bell gathers information, Moss continues moving between locations. He avoids staying anywhere too long and constantly watches for signs of pursuit. His survival instincts remain sharp, but the pressure is relentless. Every motel room, every restaurant, and every public place feels dangerous. The simple act of resting has become a luxury he can no longer afford. Eventually, Moss makes contact with Carla Jean and encourages her to leave for her mother's home. He hopes distance will provide some measure of protection. Their conversation is emotional because both of them understand that circumstances are spiraling beyond anyone's control. Although Moss tries to sound confident, the uncertainty in his situation is becoming impossible to hide. Carla Jean remains loyal and supportive despite everything happening around them. She loves her husband deeply and wants to believe that he will find a way out of the nightmare. Yet she also senses the growing danger. The life they once shared together feels increasingly distant as violence continues closing in from every direction. As Moss continues his journey, he encounters a young hitchhiker. Their brief interaction offers one of the few moments of human connection in the story. For a short time, Moss appears less like a hunted man and more like an ordinary person trying to survive impossible circumstances. However, even this small moment of normalcy exists under the shadow of the threats pursuing him. Meanwhile, Anton Chigurh suffers an injury during one of his confrontations, but even this setback fails to slow him down. Most people would seek safety and recovery, yet Chigurh remains focused entirely on his mission. He treats his wounds with the same cold efficiency he applies to everything else. Watching him continue despite serious injuries makes him seem almost unstoppable. The pursuit intensifies as multiple groups move closer to Moss's location. Criminals, investigators, and Chigurh are all converging toward the same destination. The tension becomes overwhelming because it feels inevitable that another major confrontation is approaching. Every character is moving toward a collision course that cannot be avoided forever. Sheriff Bell desperately tries to reach Moss before Chigurh does. Bell believes he may still be able to save the young man's life if he can find him in time. Yet every lead seems to arrive moments too late. The sheriff feels as though he is chasing shadows while violence spreads ahead of him. This growing sense of helplessness weighs heavily on his conscience. As the chapter nears its conclusion, Moss prepares for what may be his most dangerous challenge yet. He understands that running forever is impossible. Eventually, he will have to face the consequences of the decision he made in the desert when he picked up the suitcase of money. What began as an opportunity has evolved into a deadly chain of events that now threatens everyone connected to him. Far away, Anton Chigurh continues his pursuit with unwavering focus. He believes fate has already decided the outcome and that all he must do is follow the path laid before him. Whether that belief is true remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. The distance between hunter and prey is shrinking rapidly. The stage is now set for a turning point in the story. Moss is tired, wounded, and increasingly isolated. Bell is struggling to keep pace with events spiraling out of control. Chigurh remains relentless and terrifyingly patient. With every passing hour, the possibility of escape grows smaller, and the consequences of every choice become more severe. The hunt is entering its most dangerous phase, and nobody involved will emerge unchanged. The tension surrounding Llewellyn Moss reaches its highest point as the hunt continues across Texas. For days he has been running, hiding, and fighting to stay alive. Every choice he has made since finding the suitcase of money has pushed him deeper into danger. What once seemed like a lucky discovery has become a relentless nightmare, and the consequences are beginning to catch up with him. Despite his injuries and exhaustion, Moss refuses to surrender. He continues moving from place to place, always looking over his shoulder. His survival skills have allowed him to evade death multiple times, but even the strongest person has limits. The constant pressure of being hunted by professional killers is slowly wearing him down. Sleep is rare, trust is impossible, and peace no longer exists in his life. Meanwhile, Sheriff Ed Tom Bell becomes increasingly concerned about Moss's situation. Bell understands that the young man is trapped in a conflict much larger than himself. Although Moss made the decision to take the money, Bell sees him as a human being rather than a criminal. The sheriff hopes that somehow he can intervene before the violence reaches its inevitable conclusion. Bell's investigation leads him through a growing trail of destruction. Everywhere he goes, he encounters evidence of Anton Chigurh's presence. The stories told by witnesses are disturbing. They describe a man who appears calm even while committing horrifying acts. Bell struggles to understand how someone can possess so little regard for human life. As Bell reflects on these events, he begins questioning his own role in the world. Throughout his career, he believed that good people could stand against evil and maintain order. Now he finds himself facing a reality that seems far more complicated. The violence surrounding the case feels larger than any single investigation. It represents something deeper and darker that he cannot fully explain. While Bell wrestles with these thoughts, Moss attempts to make arrangements for Carla Jean's future. He knows the risks facing him and understands that survival is far from guaranteed. Although he remains determined to keep fighting, part of him realizes that events may already be beyond his control. His concern for Carla Jean becomes stronger than his desire to keep the money. At the same time, Anton Chigurh continues moving toward his objective. His injuries have healed enough for him to resume the hunt with full intensity. Chigurh never appears distracted by emotion or doubt. Every action he takes serves a purpose. His focus remains fixed entirely on completing the mission and recovering the stolen cash. The criminal organization searching for the money is also growing impatient. Their losses continue increasing and frustration spreads among those involved. They expected a simple recovery operation, but instead they have become trapped in a deadly cycle of violence. Several experienced men have already died, yet the money remains missing. As different groups pursue Moss, the atmosphere becomes increasingly tense. Everyone involved senses that the situation is approaching a final confrontation. There are fewer places left to hide and fewer opportunities to escape. The story begins narrowing toward a destination where difficult choices and tragic consequences await. One day, Sheriff Bell follows a promising lead that he hopes will finally bring him face to face with Moss. Bell genuinely wants to help him. Unlike many others involved in the case, the sheriff still believes in compassion and redemption. He knows Moss is not an evil man. He is simply someone whose decision placed him in circumstances beyond his ability to control. Unfortunately, events continue moving faster than Bell can react. The sheriff arrives at locations only after violence has already occurred. Time and again he finds himself looking at the aftermath rather than preventing the tragedy. This pattern frustrates him and reinforces his growing sense of helplessness. Meanwhile, Moss reaches another temporary refuge. For a brief moment it seems possible that he may have found a way to stay ahead of his pursuers. However, danger is never far away. The money remains a beacon drawing enemies closer. No matter how careful he is, the consequences of his actions continue following him. The tension reaches a heartbreaking level when Moss's fate finally catches up with him. After everything he has endured, after every narrow escape and desperate effort to survive, the violence surrounding the stolen money proves impossible to avoid. The hunt that began in the desert reaches a tragic turning point, demonstrating the brutal reality of the world these characters inhabit. Sheriff Bell eventually learns what has happened and arrives too late once again. Standing at the scene, he is overcome by disappointment and sorrow. He had hoped to save Moss, but circumstances have denied him that chance. The realization hits him hard because it confirms his fear that some forces are beyond his ability to stop. For Bell, this moment becomes about more than one man's death. It represents the collapse of the certainty he once felt as a lawman. He begins questioning whether age, experience, and good intentions are enough in a world that seems increasingly dominated by violence and chaos. As this chapter comes to an end, the story undergoes a dramatic shift. Llewellyn Moss's journey has reached its conclusion, but the consequences of his choices continue spreading outward. Carla Jean remains in danger. Sheriff Bell is struggling with profound doubts about himself and the world around him. And most importantly, Anton Chigurh is still alive, still searching, and still determined to complete what he believes fate has assigned him to do. The suitcase of money remains at the center of everything, but the story is no longer only about greed or survival. It has become a meditation on fate, morality, and the limits of human control. The final chapters will reveal whether anyone can escape the shadow cast by Anton Chigurh and whether Sheriff Bell can find meaning in a world that increasingly confuses and frightens him. The death of Llewellyn Moss changes the entire direction of the story. For much of the film, Moss had been the central figure, constantly fighting to survive against overwhelming odds. His intelligence, courage, and determination made audiences believe he might somehow escape the nightmare. Yet his sudden absence reinforces one of the film's most powerful messages. Life does not always follow the rules people expect. Sometimes events unfold without warning, and fate offers no opportunity for a heroic ending. News of Moss's death reaches Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, leaving him deeply shaken. Bell had hoped to find the young man before it was too late. Even though Moss made mistakes, the sheriff never viewed him as a bad person. He saw a man who had become trapped by a single decision and was paying a terrible price for it. Learning that he failed to save him adds another weight to Bell's already troubled conscience. As Bell continues investigating, he becomes increasingly aware of how much the world around him has changed. Throughout his career, he believed that dedication, honesty, and courage could make a difference. Now he finds himself questioning those beliefs. Every crime scene reminds him that violence often arrives without reason and leaves destruction that cannot be undone. Meanwhile, Anton Chigurh remains focused on completing his mission. To him, Moss's death does not represent a victory or a tragedy. It is simply another step in a process that he believes was set into motion long ago. Chigurh continues pursuing anyone connected to the missing money, convinced that fate demands certain outcomes regardless of personal feelings or desires. One of the most unsettling aspects of Chigurh's character is the way he justifies his actions. He rarely sees himself as responsible for the suffering he causes. Instead, he views himself as an instrument carrying out what destiny has already decided. This belief allows him to commit terrible acts while maintaining an almost calm and rational appearance. Sheriff Bell spends more time reflecting on his own life and career. Conversations with older friends and family members reveal his growing uncertainty. He begins sharing stories about previous generations, remembering a time when the world seemed easier to understand. These discussions are not merely about nostalgia, they reflect Bell's struggle to reconcile his values with the harsh realities he now faces. As Bell examines the aftermath of the case, he notices a pattern. Violence continues spreading outward, affecting people who had little or no involvement in the original crime. The stolen money has become like a stone thrown into water, creating ripples that reach far beyond the initial event. Innocent lives have been disrupted, families have suffered, and entire communities have felt the consequences. At the same time, Carla Jean Moss is trying to cope with overwhelming grief. The loss of her husband leaves her emotionally devastated. She had hoped that somehow the nightmare would end and that they could return to a normal life. Instead, she finds herself facing a future filled with uncertainty and pain. Despite everything that has happened, the danger surrounding Carla Jean has not disappeared. Anton Chigurh still believes there are unfinished obligations connected to the stolen money. His strange sense of logic convinces him that certain promises must be honored regardless of changing circumstances. This makes him an ongoing threat even after Moss's death. Bell gradually realizes that Chigurh represents something larger than a single criminal. To the sheriff, Chigurh symbolizes a force that cannot be easily understood or controlled. The killer's actions challenge Bell's assumptions about justice, morality, and human nature. Every attempt to make sense of him leads to more questions rather than answers. The emotional focus of the story increasingly shifts toward Bell's internal struggle. While earlier sections emphasized action and suspense, the narrative now explores deeper themes about aging, responsibility, and change. Bell wonders whether he still belongs in a world that seems so different from the one he once knew. As he reflects on these issues, Bell considers retirement more seriously than ever before. The case has exhausted him emotionally and spiritually. He feels as though he is constantly arriving too late, witnessing tragedy after tragedy without being able to prevent it. This sense of failure becomes difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, Trigger continues moving according to his own mysterious code. He shows no signs of regret for the lives destroyed along the way. His commitment to his beliefs remains absolute, making him as dangerous as ever. The audience is left with the unsettling realization that some people cannot be reasoned with because they operate according to principles entirely different from those of ordinary society. As the chapter nears its conclusion, the paths of the remaining major characters begin moving toward one final confrontation. Belle seeks understanding and closure. Carla Jean struggles with grief and uncertainty. Chigurh remains determined to finish what he started. Each of them carries emotional burdens created by the events set in motion when Moss discovered the suitcase in the desert. The story is now entering its final phase. The physical hunt for the money may be nearing its end, but the emotional and philosophical questions raised throughout the film are becoming more important than ever. What does justice mean in a world filled with randomness and violence? Can good people truly make a difference against forces they cannot control? And how should someone respond when confronted with a reality that challenges everything they once believed? These questions continue hanging over the story as the final chapters approach, preparing the audience for a conclusion that is thoughtful, haunting, and unlike anything found in a traditional thriller. As the story moves toward its conclusion, the atmosphere becomes quieter yet far more unsettling. Much of the action and violence that dominated the earlier chapters has already occurred, but the consequences of those events continue to echo through the lives of the remaining characters. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell finds himself reflecting on everything he has witnessed, while Anton Chigurh continues following the path he believes fate has chosen for him. Bell has spent his entire career believing that law and order could protect ordinary people from evil. Now, however, he feels increasingly uncertain. Every step of this investigation has challenged his understanding of the world. He has encountered violence that seems random, criminals who appear beyond reason, and tragedies that occur despite his best efforts to prevent them. The sheriff begins spending more time alone, thinking about the events that have unfolded. His thoughts often drift toward Llewellyn Moss. Bell cannot stop wondering whether things might have ended differently if he had reached him sooner. Although he knows he cannot change the past, the feeling of unfinished responsibility remains with him. These reflections reveal an important aspect of Bell's character. Unlike Anton Chigurh, Bell carries the emotional weight of every life affected by the case. Each death matters to him, each tragedy leaves a mark. This sense of compassion makes him deeply human, but it also leaves him vulnerable to disappointment and regret. Meanwhile, Carla Jean Moss is attempting to rebuild her life after losing her husband. The future she imagined has disappeared, replaced by grief and uncertainty. She struggles to understand why so much suffering entered her life because of a decision she never made herself. The emotional burden she carries becomes one of the film's most heartbreaking elements. Even though Llewellyn is gone, the shadow of Anton Chigurh still hangs over Carla Jean's life. Chigurh remains convinced that certain events must happen according to the rules he has created for himself. His commitment to this personal code is absolute. To him, promises and outcomes are connected by fate, and he sees no reason to abandon his beliefs simply because circumstances have changed. At the same time, Bell continues gathering information about Chigurh. Every story he hears reinforces the same terrifying conclusion. Chigurh is not motivated by greed, revenge, or anger in the traditional sense. Instead, he seems guided by an almost philosophical belief that human lives are subject to forces beyond their control. This idea troubles Bell deeply. Throughout his life, he believed people were responsible for their choices. Chigurh's worldview challenges that belief. If fate truly determines everything, then what role do morality and personal responsibility play? Bell cannot accept Chigurh's perspective, yet he also struggles to find a convincing answer. As these questions grow in his mind, Bell begins discussing them with people he trusts. Conversations with older acquaintances provide moments of reflection throughout the story. These discussions reveal Bell's fear that he may no longer understand the world around him. He wonders whether violence has become more common or whether he has simply become more aware of it with age. Meanwhile, Anton Chigurh quietly continues his journey. Unlike Bell, he never appears conflicted. He rarely questions himself or his actions. This certainty gives him a frightening sense of purpose. While others wrestle with doubt, Chigurh moves forward without hesitation, convinced that he is merely carrying out what destiny requires. The contrast between Bell and Chigurh becomes one of the film's central themes. Bell represents empathy, responsibility, and the struggle to do what is right. Chigurh represents inevitability, detachment, and the belief that individuals have little control over their lives. Their opposing philosophies create a conflict that extends far beyond physical violence. As the narrative progresses, Bear's exhaustion becomes increasingly noticeable. Years of service have taken a toll on him. The current case has forced him to confront fears and uncertainties he spent much of his life avoiding. He begins questioning whether continuing as sheriff is the right choice. For Bell, retirement is no longer simply a professional decision, it becomes a symbol of his changing relationship with the world. Part of him feels that he can no longer keep pace with the challenges surrounding him. Another part fears what retirement might mean for his sense of purpose and identity. While Bell wrestles with these thoughts, Carla Jean unknowingly moves closer to a final encounter that will determine her future. The audience understands the danger long before she does. This creates an atmosphere of suspense that grows stronger with every passing scene. The story becomes increasingly quiet during this stage, but the silence itself feels threatening. There are fewer gunfights and fewer dramatic chases, yet the tension remains overwhelming. Every conversation carries emotional weight, every decision feels significant. The characters are approaching moments that will define the rest of their lives. As the chapter draws to a close, Bell finds himself standing at a crossroads. The case has changed him in ways he never expected. He entered the investigation believing he could bring order to chaos. Now he is less certain than ever about the nature of justice, fate, and human responsibility. At the same time, Anton Chigurh continues moving forward with unwavering determination. His mission is nearly complete, but his presence remains deeply unsettling. He represents the consequences of choices already made and the idea that some events cannot be undone once they are set in motion. The final pieces of the story are now falling into place. Bell seeks understanding, Carla Jean seeks peace, and Chigurh seeks completion of what he believes fate demands. Their paths are drawing closer together, setting the stage for one of the most haunting and unforgettable endings in modern cinema. As the story enters its final stretch, the tension becomes almost unbearable. The large scale chase that began in the Texas desert has largely come to an end, yet the emotional consequences remain more powerful than ever. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell continues searching for meaning in the tragedy he has witnessed, while Anton Chigurh moves steadily toward what he considers the completion of his mission. After Llewellyn Moss's death, many people would assume the conflict is over. The money has changed hands multiple times. Countless lives have been destroyed, and the trail of violence has stretched across entire communities. Yet for Anton Chigurh unfinished business still remains. His strange philosophy does not allow him to simply walk away. In his mind, every action has consequences, and every promise carries an obligation. Meanwhile, Carla Jean Moss is trying to cope with life without her husband. The grief she experiences is overwhelming. Everything around her reminds her of the future she and Llewellyn hoped to build together. Instead of happiness and stability, she is left with loneliness and unanswered questions. The tragedy feels especially unfair because she never participated in the choices that created the disaster. Sheriff Bell remains deeply affected by these events. The case has become more than an investigation. It has forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about the world and his place within it. Bell increasingly feels like a man standing between two different eras, one he understands and one that seems completely foreign to him. During this period, Bell spends time reflecting on his career. He remembers past experiences, old friends, and lessons passed down from previous generations. These memories provide comfort, but they also highlight how much has changed. Bell wonders whether evil has become stronger or whether he has simply reached a point in life where he can no longer ignore its presence. At the same time, Anton Chigurh finally arrives at Carla Jean's location. The encounter that follows is one of the most emotionally powerful moments in the entire film. Unlike many of the people Shigur has confronted before, Carla Jean refuses to accept his twisted understanding of fate. She challenges his beliefs in a way few others ever have. Shigur explains his view of the world using the same cold logic that has guided him throughout the story. He believes events unfold according to forces beyond human control. In his mind, people simply travel paths that have already been chosen for them. This philosophy allows him to distance himself from responsibility for the suffering he causes. Carla Jean, however, sees things differently. She argues that people make choices and must accept responsibility for those choices. Her words strike at the heart of Chigurh's worldview. For perhaps the first time in the film, someone directly challenges the foundation of his beliefs rather than reacting with fear. The conversation between them becomes more than a simple exchange of words. It represents a clash between two fundamentally different ways of understanding life. Chigurh views human beings as subjects of fate. Kala Jean believes individuals possess the power to choose. Their discussion captures one of the central themes that has been present throughout the entire story. Despite Carla Jean's courage, the atmosphere remains deeply unsettling. The audience understands that she is facing one of the most dangerous men imaginable. Yet she refuses to surrender her dignity. Even in the face of overwhelming fear, she stands by her principles. This quiet strength makes her one of the film's most memorable characters. Elsewhere, Sheriff Bell continues investigating the final pieces of the case. Although he is still searching for answers, he increasingly realizes that some questions may never be resolved. The violence he has witnessed cannot be undone, and many of the people involved are already gone. The world refuses to provide the clear conclusions he once expected. Bell eventually arrives at a location where he believes Anton Chigurh may have been recently present. As he carefully explores the area, the tension becomes almost overwhelming. Bell senses the presence of danger even though he cannot see it. The scene perfectly captures the fear and uncertainty that have followed him throughout the investigation. For a moment, it seems possible that Bell and Chigurh might finally confront one another directly. Such an encounter could represent a symbolic meeting between their opposing worldviews. Yet, the story avoids the predictable path. Instead of delivering a traditional showdown, It emphasizes uncertainty and ambiguity. This choice reflects the film's larger themes. Life does not always provide dramatic confrontations or satisfying resolutions. Often people are left with incomplete answers and lingering doubts. Bell begins understanding that reality is far more complicated than the stories people tell themselves. As the chapter nears its conclusion, the emotional focus shifts almost entirely toward Bell. The sheriff realizes that the case has changed him permanently. His confidence has been shaken, his assumptions challenged, and his understanding of justice transformed. The experience has forced him to acknowledge limits he never wanted to face. Anton Chigurh, meanwhile, continues moving through the world according to his own rules. Whether his actions truly represent fate or merely personal obsession remains an open question. The film deliberately leaves room for interpretation, allowing viewers to decide for themselves what Chigurh ultimately symbolizes. With only a short distance left before the story reaches its conclusion, every character stands at a turning point. Kala Jean has confronted tragedy with courage. Chigurh has followed his beliefs to their logical end. Bell has been forced to re-evaluate everything he once thought he knew. The final chapter will now explore what remains after violence, loss, and uncertainty have stripped away all illusions. As the story approaches its conclusion, the atmosphere becomes increasingly reflective. Most of the major events have already occurred, and the focus now shifts toward the emotional and philosophical consequences left behind. The violence that once drove the narrative has faded into the background, leaving characters to confront the meaning of everything they have experienced. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell finds himself carrying a heavy burden. Throughout the investigation, he witnessed death, suffering, and destruction on a scale that deeply affected him. More importantly, he was forced to confront his own limitations. For perhaps the first time in his life, Bell feels uncertain about his ability to understand the world around him. The case involving Cleveline Moss and Anton Chigurh has challenged beliefs that Bell spent decades building. He always believed that experience, wisdom, and determination could help him overcome difficult situations. Yet this investigation repeatedly proved otherwise. Every time he thought he was getting closer to preventing tragedy, events slipped beyond his control. As Bell reflects on these experiences, he begins thinking seriously about retirement. The idea has existed in the back of his mind for some time, but now it feels unavoidable. He is tired, not only physically but emotionally and spiritually. The world seems different from the one he once knew, and he wonders whether he still has a place within it. Meanwhile, Anton Chigurh continues moving forward after completing what he believes was his responsibility. Throughout the story, Chigurh acted according to a personal code that few people could understand. He rarely displayed emotion and almost never questioned his own decisions. His certainty remained unshaken even when others challenged his beliefs. One of the most disturbing aspects of Chigurh's character is that he never sees himself as a villain. In his mind, he is simply following a path determined by fate. This belief allows him to avoid feelings of guilt or regret. Whether viewers accept his philosophy or reject it entirely, there is no denying its influence on every action he takes. Following the events involving Carla Jean, Chigurh leaves the area and continues traveling. For a brief moment, it appears that his journey may finally be complete. However, fate or perhaps simple chance has one more surprise waiting for him. An unexpected event suddenly interrupts his path and reminds the audience that even someone as confident as Chigurh is not beyond the reach of randomness. This moment is important because it challenges the image of Chigurh as an unstoppable force. Throughout the film, he often seems almost supernatural in his ability to survive and succeed. Yet the world remains unpredictable. No amount of planning, intelligence, or determination can eliminate uncertainty entirely. Although Chigurh manages to continue on his way, the incident serves as a powerful reminder of one of the story's central themes. Life is filled with unexpected turns. People may believe they control their destinies, but reality often proves otherwise. The film repeatedly explores the tension between personal choice and uncontrollable circumstance. Back in his own life, Sheriff Bell struggles to find peace. The case is essentially over, but closure remains elusive. He cannot stop thinking about the people who died or the opportunities he missed to intervene. The memories linger in his mind, refusing to disappear. Bell's reflections reveal how deeply he cares about others. Unlike many characters in the story, he measures success not by money, power, or survival, but by his ability to protect people. The fact that he could not prevent so much suffering leaves him feeling disappointed in himself, even though many of the events were beyond his control. As retirement approaches, Bell spends time talking with family and remembering lessons from earlier generations. These conversations become increasingly important because they connect him to a broader sense of history. They remind him that every generation faces challenges that seem overwhelming at the time. Bell begins realizing that uncertainty is not unique to the modern world. People before him also struggled with fear, violence, and change. While this realization does not erase his doubts, it provides a different perspective. Perhaps the world has always been difficult to understand. Perhaps every generation believes it is witnessing unprecedented problems. Meanwhile, the legacy of Llewellyn Moss continues to influence those left behind. Although he is gone, the choices he made continue affecting others. His story serves as a reminder that even a single decision can create consequences far beyond what anyone expects. What started as the discovery of a suitcase in the desert ultimately transformed countless lives. The film gradually shifts away from physical action and toward contemplation. Rather than focusing on what happens next, it encourages viewers to think about what has already happened. Questions about morality, fate, responsibility, and human nature become more important than the details of the plot itself. As this chapter comes to an end, Sheriff Bell stands on the edge of a new stage in his life. The badge that once defined him is losing its significance. The certainty he once possessed has been replaced by questions that may never be fully answered. Yet, despite his doubts, Bell continues searching for meaning. The final chapter will bring the story to its quiet but unforgettable conclusion. Instead of offering simple answers, it will leave viewers with ideas to consider long after the credits roll. The journey that began with grit and violence will end with reflection, memory, and a deeper examination of what it means to live in an unpredictable world. Chigurh begins narrowing down his target's location. He approaches the task with chilling patience. For him, hunting moss is not personal. It is simply a mission that must be completed. Moss, however, is not an easy target. He notices suspicious activity around him and starts changing his routines. He avoids predictable behavior and remains constantly aware of his surroundings. His instincts tell him that he is being tracked, even though he doesn't yet know exactly how. As pressure mounts, Moss decides to leave town temporarily. Before departing, he makes arrangements for Carla Jean's safety. Their conversations reveal how much they care about each other. Carla Jean senses that something serious is happening, but Moss refuses to reveal the full truth. He believes protecting her means keeping her away from the dangerous details. While Moss travels, Anton Chigurh leaves a trail of violence behind him. Anyone who stands in his way becomes a potential victim. Businessmen, hired trackers, and ordinary people all discover how ruthless he can be. Chigurh views obstacles as problems to be removed rather than human beings with lives and families. This complete lack of empathy makes him almost seem like a force of nature rather than a normal man. Sheriff Bell continues piecing together the puzzle. Every crime scene he visits leaves him increasingly disturbed. The violence he encounters feels different from anything he experienced earlier in his career. Bell begins questioning whether traditional law enforcement methods are enough to confront a killer like Chigurh. The world around him appears to be changing faster than he can understand. Eventually, Moss reaches a motel where he plans to stay hidden for a while. He carefully chooses his location and remains alert to possible threats. However, he soon discovers evidence that confirms his worst fears. Someone is tracking the money. The realization changes everything. No matter how cautious he is, the suitcase itself is leading his enemies directly to him. Understanding the danger, Moss develops a plan to outsmart his pursuers. He hides the money in a clever location and prepares for the possibility of an attack. Every move he makes becomes part of a deadly chess match between himself and Anton Chigurh. Both men are intelligent, resourceful, and determined to survive. Late one night, the tension finally explodes. Chigurh arrives near Moss's location, guided by the tracking device. The motel becomes the setting for a terrifying confrontation. Moss notices signs that someone is nearby and immediately prepares for combat. He knows that whoever has found him is extremely dangerous. The silence of the night creates unbearable suspense. Both men understand that one mistake could mean death. Moss waits carefully, watching and listening for any movement. Chigurh advances methodically, confident that his target is close. Neither man wants to reveal his position first. What follows is a nerve-wracking encounter filled with fear, strategy, and survival instincts. Moss manages to escape the immediate danger, but the confrontation proves one thing beyond doubt. Anton Chigurh is now directly on his trail. The hunter and the hunted have finally come face to face. As the chapter closes, Moss realizes that running alone may not be enough. Chigurh is unlike anyone he has ever encountered. The money has pulled him into a nightmare from which there may be no escape. And somewhere in the darkness, Anton Chigurh continues moving forward, calm and unstoppable, determined to finish the hunt. The deadly game between Llewellyn Moss and Anton Chigurh is now fully underway. After narrowly escaping the first direct encounter, Moss realizes that survival will require more than luck. Every place he visits could become a trap, and every stranger could be connected to the people searching for the money. The suitcase that once represented freedom and opportunity has become a burden that threatens to destroy everything he loves. After leaving the motel, Moss works quickly to stay ahead of his pursuers. His military training allows him to think strategically under pressure. Instead of panicking, he studies every situation carefully and tries to predict what his enemies will do next. However, he knows that Anton Chigurh is unlike anyone he has faced before. The sheriff hopes that somehow he can intervene before the violence reaches its inevitable conclusion. Bell's investigation leads him through a growing trail of destruction. Everywhere he goes, he encounters evidence of Anton Chigurh's presence. The stories told by witnesses are disturbing. They describe a man who appears calm even while committing horrifying acts. Bell struggles to understand how someone can possess so little regard for human life. As Bell reflects on these events, he begins questioning his own role in the world. Throughout his career, he believed that good people could stand against evil and maintain order. Now he finds himself facing a reality that seems far more complicated. The violence surrounding the case feels larger than any single investigation. It represents something deeper and darker that he cannot fully explain. While Bell wrestles with these thoughts, Moss attempts to make arrangements for Carla Jean's future. He knows the risks facing him and understands that survival is far from guaranteed. Although he remains determined to keep fighting, part of him realizes that events may already be beyond his control. His concern for Carla Jean becomes stronger than his desire to keep the money. At the same time, Anton Chigurh continues moving toward his objective. His injuries have healed enough for him to resume the hunt with full intensity. Chigurh never appears distracted by emotion or doubt. Every action he takes serves a purpose. His focus remains fixed entirely on completing the mission and recovering the stolen cash. The criminal organization searching for the money is also growing impatient. Their losses continue increasing and frustration spreads among those involved. They expected a simple recovery operation, but instead they have become trapped in a deadly cycle of violence. Several experienced men have already died, yet the money remains missing. As different groups pursue Moss, the atmosphere becomes increasingly tense. Everyone involved senses that the situation is approaching a final confrontation. There are fewer places left to hide and fewer opportunities to escape. The story begins narrowing toward a destination where difficult choices and tragic consequences await. One day, Sheriff Bell follows a promising lead that he hopes will finally bring him face to face with Moss. Bell genuinely wants to help him. Unlike many others involved in the case, the sheriff still believes in compassion and redemption. He knows Moss is not an evil man. He is simply someone whose decision placed him in circumstances beyond his ability to control. Unfortunately, events continue moving faster than Bell can react. The sheriff arrives at locations only after violence has already occurred. Time and again he finds himself looking at the aftermath rather than preventing the tragedy. This pattern frustrates him and reinforces his growing sense of helplessness. Meanwhile, Moss reaches another temporary refuge. For a brief moment it seems possible that he may have found a way to stay ahead of his pursuers. However, danger is never far away. The money remains a beacon drawing enemies closer. No matter how careful he is, the consequences of his actions continue following him. The tension reaches a heartbreaking level when Moss's fate finally catches up with him. After everything he has endured, after every narrow escape and desperate effort to survive, the violence surrounding the stolen money proves impossible to avoid. The hunt that began in the desert reaches a tragic turning point, demonstrating the brutal reality of the world these characters inhabit. Sheriff Bell eventually learns what has happened and arrives too late once again. Standing at the scene, he is overcome by disappointment and sorrow. He had hoped to save Moss, but circumstances have denied him that chance. The realization hits him hard because it confirms his fear that some forces are beyond his ability to stop. For Bell, this moment becomes about more than one man's death. It represents the collapse of the certainty he once felt as a lawman. He begins questioning whether age, experience, and good intentions are enough in a world that seems increasingly dominated by violence and chaos. As this chapter comes to an end, the story undergoes a dramatic shift. Llewellyn Moss's journey has reached its conclusion, but the consequences of his choices continue spreading outward. Carla Jean remains in danger. As the final chapter of No Country for Old Men begins, the story leaves behind the gunfights, chases, and bloodshed that defined much of the narrative. What remains are the emotional scars left on those who survived. The film's ending is not focused on action but on reflection, forcing both the characters and the audience to consider the deeper meaning behind everything that has happened. Sheriff Ed Tom Bell has reached a turning point in his life. The investigation involving Llewellyn Moss, Anton Chigurh, and the stolen money has changed him profoundly. For years, Bell believed that courage, honesty, and hard work could help him make a difference. Now he finds himself questioning those beliefs. The violence he witnessed has left him feeling older, more vulnerable, and less certain about the world around him. Eventually, Bell decides to retire. The decision is not simply about age, it represents his acknowledgement that he can no longer continue as he once did. Throughout the case, he repeatedly arrived too late to prevent tragedy. Although he knows he did everything he could, the feeling of failure remains difficult to escape. As Bell adjusts to retirement, he spends more time reflecting on his past. He thinks about the people who influenced him, particularly his father. These memories provide comfort during a period of uncertainty. They remind him of values that existed long before the events of the current story and may continue long after he is gone. One morning, Bell sits with his wife and begins sharing two dreams he recently had about his father. The first dream is simple and somewhat ordinary. The second dream, however, carries much deeper meaning. In it, Bell remembers riding through snowy mountains while his father travels ahead of him carrying fire in a horn. The dream is peaceful yet emotionally powerful. Bell explains that his father rides into the darkness before him, preparing a place where warmth and safety will be waiting. Even though Bell cannot see the destination, he knows his father is there ahead of him. The dream suggests hope, guidance, and the idea that wisdom from previous generations continues to light the way forward. This dream serves as the emotional heart of the film's ending. After spending the entire story confronting violence, confusion, and uncertainty, Bell finds comfort not in solving the case but in remembering where he came from. The dream reminds him that life is larger than any single tragedy and that people often find strength in the values passed down to them. Meanwhile, Anton Chigurh disappears from the story. Unlike many traditional villains, he is never captured or defeated. His survival leaves viewers with an unsettling feeling because it suggests that some forms of evil cannot be neatly contained. Chigurh remains a mystery to the very end, a figure who represents forces beyond easy explanation. Yet the film does not present Chigurh as all-powerful. Earlier events demonstrated that even he is vulnerable to chance and unpredictability. Despite his belief in fate, he remains subject to the same uncertain world as everyone else. This contradiction is one of the reasons the character remains so fascinating. The story of Llewellyn Moss also takes on new meaning when viewed from the ending. Moss was brave, intelligent, and resourceful. He fought harder than most people would have under similar circumstances. Yet his skills could not protect him from every consequence of the decision he made in the desert. His journey becomes a reminder that actions often create effects far beyond what we anticipate. Carla Jean's story is equally important. Throughout the film, she represents ordinary people caught in circumstances they did not choose. Her suffering highlights how violence rarely affects only those directly responsible. Innocent individuals frequently bear the emotional costs of decisions made by others. As the narrative reaches its final moments, viewers realize that the film has never been solely about money or crime. Those elements drive the plot, but the deeper story explores much larger themes. It examines aging, responsibility, morality, fate, and the struggle to find meaning in a world that often appears chaotic. One of the film's greatest strengths is its refusal to provide easy answers. Many stories conclude by clearly separating heroes from villains and rewarding good behavior while punishing evil. No Country for Old Men takes a different approach. It presents life as complex, unpredictable, and sometimes unfair. People make choices, but they must also confront circumstances beyond their control. Sheriff Bell's final dream captures this idea beautifully. The image of his father carrying fire through the darkness suggests that even when the world feels confusing or frightening, individuals can still find guidance in memory, tradition, and human connection. The dream does not solve Bell's problems, but it gives him a sense of peace. The film ends quietly, without dramatic music or grand speeches. Bell finishes describing the dream and simply says that he woke up. The moment is brief, yet it leaves a lasting impression because it invites viewers to interpret its meaning for themselves. In the end, No Country for Old Men remains one of the most thought-provoking thrillers ever made. Rather than focusing solely on suspense and violence, it challenges audiences to think about fate, choice, and the passage of time. Its unforgettable characters, haunting atmosphere, and powerful themes have earned it a place among the greatest films of modern cinema. The story begins with a man finding money in the desert, but it ends with a man searching for understanding. And in that journey from action to reflection lies the true power of the film. The final image is not one of violence or fear, but of a distant light glowing in the darkness, a symbol of hope, memory, and the enduring wisdom of those who came before us.